All right. Hey, everyone out there. Welcome, welcome. If you are prepping for the UPSC exams, well, then, there's always something,
Yeah.
some hot button issue, right?
Always.
Yeah, exactly. Making headlines. And today we're going deep on one that honestly is going to be super important for you to know.
Mhm.
Whether you're studying for mains or for prelims, we're talking about offshore sand mining in India.
Oh, yeah.
And particularly all the recent developments with this OAMDR Amendment Act. It just came out in 2023.
Big one.
Yeah, so much controversy surrounding it.
Yeah.
Just imagine this for a second.
Okay.
Okay, you're on the coast of Kerala, and right there offshore, there's potentially enough sand to meet all of Kerala's construction needs for the next 25 years.
That's a lot of sand.
I know, right? Sounds amazing, so promising, right?
It does, but there's always a catch.
Yeah, exactly. It's not that simple.
Right.
And so that's exactly what we're going to unpack today.
Absolutely. And I think for anyone listening who is aiming for that IAS officer role, this is a topic that really hits on so many different aspects of the exam. We're talking environmental policy, resource management, even federalism, all those juicy GS3 themes.
You got it. And to guide our deep dive today,
Yeah.
we're using this fantastic article from Down to Earth.
Hmm.
So first things first, why is this all over the news lately? Well, the central government's really pushing for this offshore sand mining thing,
Yeah.
especially off the coast of Kerala. But here's the thing. The Kerala government and local communities, they are not on board. They are pushing back, and they've got some serious concerns.
Yeah, and their concerns are not coming out of nowhere. I mean, the Geological Survey of India, the GSI, they have confirmed
Yeah.
that there are vast deposits of sand off Kerala's coast. We are talking millions of tons of this stuff, potentially enough to meet the state's construction needs for, like you said, a quarter century.
It's a lot of time.
It is.
So I'm wondering, with all that potential, why is the central government so eager to tap into this? Like, what's the big draw for them?
Well, I mean, the driving force has got to be the economics, right? If they auction off these sand blocks, they could generate a ton of revenue for the government. Then you've got the boost to the shipping industry, more trade activity, and of course, the potential for a whole lot of GST collection. From an economic standpoint, I mean, it makes a lot of sense.
Okay, yeah. No, I see that. But before we get too deep into all of that, let's just back up for a sec and make sure we're all on the same page about what exactly sand mining is, especially in the context of India.
Right, yeah. So in India, sand is considered a minor mineral under the Mines and Minerals Development and Regulation Act of 1957, or MMDR Act, if you want to be brief about it. And to try and keep things at least somewhat sustainable, the Ministry of Environment, Forests, and Climate Change, they put out these guidelines back in 2016 for sand mining. But when we start talking about offshore mining, things get a little broader than just sand.
Oh, so we're not just talking about scooping sand off the seabed.
Nope, not at all. Offshore mining really means extracting any kind of mineral resource or precious stone you can find on the ocean floor. And India's exclusive economic zone, the EEZ, that holds a ton of potential. We're talking a huge range of resources: lime mud, heavy mineral placers, polymetallic nodules, like a whole treasure chest down there.
Whoa, okay. So this EEZ has a lot more than just sand for construction then.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And actually, just last year, in 2024, India had their very first offshore critical mineral auction ever. It was a huge step towards getting at these crucial resources like lithium, cobalt, nickel, copper, all super important for renewable energy and advanced manufacturing. The goal is to cut down how much they have to import and really put India on the map in the global mineral market.
All right, so we've got all these resources, the government is motivated, but we also know there's a lot of pushback happening. I know the OAMDR Amendment Act from 2023 is a big piece of this. Can you break down why that act is so important when we talk about offshore mining?
You can think of it as the foundation of India's whole strategy for offshore mining. The original OAMDR Act from 2002, that laid some groundwork. But this 2023 amendment, that brought some really crucial changes. The idea was to make the whole process more transparent, accountable, and well-defined.
Transparency and accountability. Those are some words any UPSC aspirant loves to hear.
Right.
So can you give us some concrete examples of how the amendment tries to do that?
Definitely. So first off, the auction process for getting mining rights is now way more transparent. It helps to make sure that any company that wants to bid on an area, they're all on a level playing field. Second, the amendment sets up this trust fund specifically for anyone affected by the mining. The goal is to make sure that local communities benefit directly from the resource extraction. It's addressing those concerns about equity and resource sharing.
Makes sense, yeah. Getting out ahead of those concerns is crucial. What else does the amendment do?
Another big one is the emphasis on exploration before any large-scale extraction happens. It's about really understanding the resources that are available and doing in-depth environmental impact assessments before any major mining operations even start.
So it's not just a free-for-all. There's a process.
Exactly. And on top of all that, lease periods are fixed now. 50 years. No more of that back and forth with discretionary renewals that we had under the old version of the Act.
All right, so we've got a framework that, at least on paper, seems to be responding to some key concerns. But we both know this is not the end of the story, right?
Not even close. The details are where things get really tricky.
Yeah, I think so too.
So in the next part of our deep dive, we're going to dig into those details. Look at the concerns surrounding offshore mining and how they connect to the bigger picture both within India and globally.
Okay, I am ready for that. It's going to get really interesting. For everyone listening, hang in there. We'll be right back with part 2 of our deep dive into offshore sand mining in India. And just as a reminder, all of this is based on this great article from Down to Earth, so go check that out for more reading. All right, see you soon.
See ya.
Welcome back, everyone, to our deep dive on offshore sand mining in India. Last time we set the stage, talked about the resources involved, why the government's interested, and the laws that are supposed to be governing it all, especially the OAMDR Amendment Act from 2023. But like we hinted at, there's another side to this story, a side full of worries and potential problems that are really, really important for UPSC aspirants to understand.
Right. Yeah, the economic potential definitely looks good. But we have to look at the environmental and social impacts of offshore mining, too. These are the kinds of things that often show up in case studies and those tough analytical questions in the UPSC mains exam. So knowing the ins and outs of this is going to be key for doing well.
Okay, so let's jump into those concerns then. The one that comes to mind right away for me is the environmental side of things. I mean, we're talking about disturbing the seafloor, potentially messing up delicate ecosystems. How bad could these risks really be? And what are the specific worries when we're talking about India, especially Kerala, where this whole debate is so heated?
The environmental risks are definitely real and they're complicated. The first thing is that when you're taking minerals from the seabed, you just can't avoid disturbing it. And that creates these plumes of sediment that can basically suffocate marine life and disrupt the whole food chain. Then you've got the potential for wastewater discharge that often has heavy metals and other toxins in it, and that just pollutes the marine environment even more. Specifically in Kerala, experts are worried about destabilizing the coastal ecosystem, which could make them more vulnerable to tsunamis and cyclones, and also messing up sediment dynamics, which could lead to more coastal erosion and damage marine habitats.
Wow, that's a lot. And I imagine these environmental risks are even bigger when you consider that we don't even know that much about deep-sea ecosystems in India.
You're absolutely right. That lack of knowledge adds a whole other layer of uncertainty and risk. We're basically going into this blind...
Like sending a bulldozer into a fragile ecosystem that we barely understand.
Yeah, and it's not just the immediate environmental damage either. We're learning more and more that messing with the seafloor can release huge amounts of carbon that's been stored there for who knows how long. And that contributes to global warming and makes climate change even worse.
So on one hand, we're getting minerals that are important for green tech and moving away from fossil fuels. But on the other hand, the process of getting them could be making the problem we're trying to solve even worse.
Yeah, it's a perfect example of how complicated and contradictory sustainable development can be. It all comes down to finding that balance where we can use resources responsibly without doing too much environmental damage.
Okay, so we've got the environmental concerns. But let's not forget about the communities who rely on the ocean for their livelihoods. This is something that comes up a lot in UPSC, usually connected to issues of equitable resource distribution and social justice. What are the main worries on that front? And how do they tie into the bigger debate about offshore mining in India?
You're right. Those social and economic parts of this are super important, and that's where things get even more messy. Fishing communities are the ones who are really leading the opposition to offshore mining. Their livelihoods depend on healthy marine ecosystems, and they're very worried about what might happen to fish populations, their traditional fishing areas, and the whole way of life.
Yeah, it's that classic clash between development and livelihoods. We see it over and over in UPSC case studies. So how do we balance the economic potential of offshore mining with the need to protect those communities who are so vulnerable?
That is the million-dollar question, and there's no easy answer. One important part of it is making sure that any revenue made from mining gets shared fairly. The OAMDR Amendment Act does have that trust fund for affected communities, but there's still a lot of debate about whether that's enough and how those funds will be managed and given out fairly.
So we need transparency and accountability, not just in the laws, but
Uh-huh.
also in how the benefits of these resources get shared.
Absolutely. And beyond just sharing the money, we also need to do social impact assessments and have alternative livelihood programs for people who might be displaced by mining, and strong ways for people to voice their complaints if they have any. Those are all things that UPSC aspirants should know and be able to analyze critically.
It's a lot. We've got environmental protection, social equity, economic development, and even global stuff to think about. It sounds like getting this right requires a really deep understanding of how all these factors connect.
And there's one more layer we need to add in, the global context. The demand for minerals like cobalt and nickel, which are super important for renewable energy and electric vehicles, that demand is going through the roof. And this global competition for resources puts pressure on countries like India to use their offshore reserves, even if it means harming the environment and hurting people's well-being.
So it's not just local concerns. This is all connected to global trends and pressures, too.
Exactly. And for anyone who wants to be a policymaker, understanding how those global forces influence what happens at the national level is really crucial.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground here, and I know there's more to talk about. We've looked at the resources, the economic incentives, the environmental and social concerns, and the global picture. But what about solutions? What can we actually do to reduce the risks and make sure offshore mining is done responsibly?
That's a great question, and that's exactly what we'll be talking about in the final part of our deep dive. We're going to explore some potential solutions, look at what other countries are doing well, and think about what a sustainable and equitable approach to offshore mining could look like in India.
Awesome. I can't wait to hear more. For everyone listening, don't miss it. We'll be back with part 3, breaking down the way forward and giving you the knowledge and insights you need to tackle this complex issue in your exams. And don't forget, all of this comes from a great article by Down to Earth, so make sure you check it out for a deeper dive. All right, see you soon for the last part of our exploration. Welcome back, everyone. We're in the home stretch now of our deep dive into offshore sand mining in India. We've talked about the potential, the worries, the complexities of the global picture. Now let's switch gears and think about what a responsible way forward might look like.
Exactly. We've seen the challenges, now it's time for solutions. Time to look at the best ways to help India navigate this whole thing sustainably and equitably. This is exactly the kind of analytical thinking that UPSC examiners are looking for.
Okay, so let's get those brains working. We know there are concerns about damage to the environment. What are some actual concrete steps that can be taken to minimize the impact of offshore mining on marine ecosystems?
Well, one of the most important things is to make sure we're doing thorough and transparent environmental impact assessments, or EIAs for short, before any mining activity even starts. These assessments need to look at not just the immediate effects on the environment, but also the long-term consequences for marine life, for coastal communities, and even for the climate.
EIAs seem like a no-brainer. But what about once mining actually starts? Are there ways to make the process itself less harmful?
Absolutely. We can learn a lot from countries like Norway. They've been doing offshore oil and gas extraction for a long time, and they've developed some really strong environmental regulations. They've got strict guidelines for keeping pollution to a minimum, managing waste disposal and restoring areas that have been affected. If India adopted similar practices along with constant monitoring and enforcement, that would be a huge step towards responsible offshore mining.
Norway, that's a great example. So learning from other countries who have already dealt with these issues is key. But beyond regulations, are there any new technologies that can help reduce the impact of offshore mining on the environment?
Definitely. There's a lot of research happening right now on things like precision mining techniques.
Yeah.
These target very specific mineral deposits, so there's less disruption to the surrounding seabed. And we're seeing innovations in remote sensing and autonomous underwater vehicles. Those can help monitor environmental conditions and catch any problems early on.
So it sounds like it's a combination of policies, best practices, and new technologies all working together. But let's not forget about the people who will be affected. We've talked about the concerns of fishing communities and the need to make sure everyone benefits fairly. How can we make sure that offshore mining doesn't end up hurting people's livelihoods?
You're absolutely right. Social equity has to be a core part of sustainable development. First off, we need to go beyond just setting up trust funds. We need transparent systems for sharing the revenue that directly benefit the communities who are most impacted by mining.
Transparency is key, I agree. But what about people whose livelihoods could be directly affected, like people who might lose their traditional fishing grounds? Are there ways to help them?
Absolutely. Investing in alternative livelihood programs is super important. That can mean training people in new skills, supporting things like sustainable aquaculture or ecotourism initiatives, or even providing financial help for people who need to relocate.
So it's about creating new opportunities for these communities so they can adapt and thrive. Even with all these changes happening around them, it's not just about reducing the negative impacts, but about creating new possibilities. That's a really crucial point, especially for those of you who will be tackling those essay questions in the UPSC mains exam.
You got it. And we can't forget that this is an ongoing process. We need to be talking to local communities, getting their feedback, and making sure their voices are heard throughout the decision-making process. That's how you build trust and make sure that development benefits everyone, not just a few.
Wow, this has been such an insightful deep dive. We've covered so much, from the resources and the laws to the environmental and social concerns and potential solutions. What's the main takeaway you want our listeners to walk away with, especially those who are getting ready for the UPSC exams?
I think the biggest thing to remember is that offshore sand mining in India, it's not just an environmental issue or an economic issue. It's a complex web of ecological, social, economic, and political factors. If you can understand this complexity, if you can analyze different points of view, and if you can put together balanced, well-informed arguments, then you're on the right track. That's what's going to help shape India's future.
I love that, connecting the dots, thinking critically, and working towards solutions that are good for both people and the planet. And just a reminder, we got all this great information from a fantastic article by Down to Earth, so go check it out for more.
For sure. And if you found this deep dive helpful, please subscribe, like, and share it with your fellow UPSC aspirants. We'll be back with more episodes breaking down complex issues and giving you the knowledge you need to succeed.
Until then, keep studying, and best of luck with your UPSC preparations.